Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another Soothkeep live stream. As always, please give me a thumbs up if you have good audio and video. I'm looking forward to talking about this subject tonight, which is really the end of the Bronze Age. And maybe I didn't title this properly. I called it Dinosaurs Survived Until the Bronze Age, but I probably would have got a little bit better traction for this video if I had titled it something along the lines of the comet impact that ended the Bronze Age. So maybe I should go ahead and redo this in a couple weeks, do the same outline, but just give it the new title, The Comet Impact That Ended the Bronze Age, and see if we get a little more traction on the video. But at any rate, it's an exciting topic. The whole concept of catastrophes that were caused by planets and comets, the whole subject of a meteorite impact, fire falling from heaven, the planets and giant comets causing massive tsunamis and tidal waves here on Earth. It's a fascinating subject. And once a person enters into this topic, you begin to realize that creation geology or creation apologetics doesn't have just one catastrophe, which is Noah's flood. That's a very important catastrophe, but it was followed by a string of catastrophes, one that ended the Gold Age, one that ended the Silver Age, one that ended the Bronze Age, and two of them in the Iron Age, one at David's time and one at the time of King Hezekiah. When you enter into this, you begin to realize that there's a lot of geological phenomena out here that just can't be explained merely and only by the flood. Well, anyway, the time frame that I want to focus on tonight is the Bronze Age, events in the Bronze Age, and more specifically, the major event that ended the Bronze Age. Now, what's interesting about this to me is that I grew up being taught that there was a gigantic comet impact that happened about 70 million years ago, and it brought the extinction of all the dinosaurs. And then we had this long transition period, and we moved into the age of the big mammals. And then we finally came to the Ice Age, and then we came to modern man. Well, the interesting thing about this is there's a tremendous amount of geologic evidence around the world that the dinosaurs did suffer extinction through cometary event. Now, I don't think it would be legitimate to say that one single comet event brought the extinction of all of the dinosaurs. I think if you look at the evidence, you're going to realize that comet events at the time of the Gold Age, the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, and the later comet impacts all affected the megafauna, including the dinosaurs. And I think it would be fair to say that probably dinosaurs are not actually really extinct today. But extinction events led to their decimation for the most part. The vast majority of the species are extinct, and we only have some of the smaller varieties left. I think there's still sea monsters in the ocean. We just only rarely see them. And to be honest, I actually believe there is a plesiosaur or a group of plesiosaurs that live in Loch Ness. This isn't believing in fairy tales. This simply looking at, from a scientific perspective, looking at evidence that starts with the biblical evidence, that starts with accepting interpretations of geology and archaeology and scientific observation that harmonize with the Bible. And you realize, yeah, there's dinosaur footprints mixed with human footprints. There are photographs of the Loch Ness Monster, including one taken by the National Geographic Society. So, yeah, there's evidence that we still have dinosaurs available today. Now, another line of thought that I want to go down is when we come to this issue, we definitely want to follow the historical grammatical hermeneutic. We want to be biblical. We want to trust what the Bible says, and we want to trust what science says. If we're actually approaching this subject correctly, we're going to discover that the Bible and science absolutely do not contradict ever. If there's an apparent contradiction, that contradiction is either because we're misunderstanding the Bible, or we're misunderstanding the scientific evidence, or we're misunderstanding both of them. Now, I just saw a good question in the timeline here, and I'll just go ahead and answer it right now. And that question is, how did the meteors manage to kill the dinosaurs but not man? Well, great question, and there's actually a great answer. The meteors that came down at the different times, they killed a tremendous high percentage of the dinosaurs and the megafauna, like the mastodons and the mammoths. They did not kill all of them. The few remaining ones were hunted to extinction by man. And when these comets came down, for instance, the comet that came down at the time of the Bronze Age, the records that we have from the North American Indians, they recognize, or the Native Americans, they recognize that 9 out of 10 people were killed. In some places, it was more than that. Some places, there was just a very tiny fraction of people that survived. So let's look at this spectrum here. I want you to picture in your mind, you picture the flood, then you move over a little space on your little timeline, and you picture another catastrophe. That's a limited flood. It's a tsunami flood accompanied with fire that falls from heaven. And that's the end of the Gold Age. That's the time of Babel. Now move over a little bit more on your timeline and picture another event that's involving a planet or a comet, and it brings the end of the Silver Age. This is the same time as Abraham with Sodom and Gomorrah. And here again, there was a tsunami wave of water that followed a comet event that sent fire on the earth. In the Bible, we see that fire destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, just like earlier it destroyed the Tower of Babel. Then when you move farther in the timeline, you come to the time of the Exodus. In the Bible, we see the events that fell upon Egypt at the time of the Exodus, where the Lord had supernaturally guided visitations from heaven, along with supernatural visitations that can only be explained by the power of God. And that was followed also by, in some parts of the world, not necessarily all parts of the world, by a massive wave of water. Now, when we move deeper, we're going to see different events. At the time of David, the mountains melted and flowed like butter. And in the time of Hezekiah, the sundial moved back 5 days on the annual sundial, which was a sundial with 720 steps, 2 steps for every day. Every step was a half a day. And so if you move back 10 steps on this, you move back 5 days, and that's when the earth added 5 days to the calendar. Now, each of these events, as I'd mentioned, we only see it in the Bible from how it affects the people of the line of the redemption. But in secular history, at the same point in time, we see a lot of evidence from many different parts of the world that cover the same event. So, just for instance, in the Bible at the time of the Silver Age, we're looking at Sodom and Gomorrah. We see fire falls from heaven, destroys Sodom and the cities on the plain. And then we move beyond that. And it looks like, if we were just to look at the Bible, all we have is a very limited local event. But the fact of the matter is, this event sent fire all across the Middle East. It sent fire across North Africa. It sent fire parts of Asia, Europe, and North America. This is when the earth rolled on its axis. Antarctica rolled south to the South Pole. Siberia rolled north, and so did Scandinavia. And this led to the exodus of the North Sea peoples. They fled from Scandinavia. They came into the Mediterranean, and they became the Hyksos dynasty. They, mingling with the Egyptians, they became the Carthaginian dynasty. They mingled with the locals there. They became the Syrophoenician dynasty. They mingled with the locals there. Now, today we want to focus mostly on the event that ended the Bronze Age. And this one did tremendous destruction in North America and South America, did tremendous destruction to the flora and fauna. It destroyed probably at least 90% of the people. Now, most of the facts I'm going to bring out today, I'm only going to bring out stuff from one book. This book is called The Cycles of Cosmic Catastrophes, a book that has a tremendous amount of scientific observation in the book, and yet he's not operating from biblical presuppositions. He's not operating from a young earth perspective. And so they end up interpreting the data that they present largely through the rose-colored glasses, or maybe I should call it the hell-colored glasses of evolution and ancient Earth. In this view of things, Earth has been here for maybe 12 billion years. The dinosaurs have been here for 300 million years, or they were here 300 million years ago with their rise. The dinosaurs mostly became extinct around 70 million years ago, and they just marched through the ages. And then the era that we're looking at, the end of the Bronze Age here, they're going to date this at about 13,000 years ago for the most part. And we're going to find ourselves, at least I do, differing with that perspective simply because I believe the biblical time frame. I believe in the young earth. I believe that we've been here for 6,000 years from the garden to the present time, give or take a little bit, probably give a little bit because I don't think we've reached the 6,000 years yet. Now, I mentioned we're going to talk about dinosaurs survived until the Bronze Age. And I know that probably most of us listening here today, we believe that dinosaurs were on the ark. We've gotten used to this thinking, and the dinosaurs came off the ark, but we don't really know much what to do with it after that. Did they last 100 years? Did they last 1,000 years? How far did they go? The fact of the matter is there's actually quite a bit of evidence in the Bible on dinosaurs reaching all the way down into the Bronze Age. And we're going to look at that. And then we're going to move into some other extra biblical information that supports this. And then we're going to look at information that talks about this Bronze Age destruction and how it ties in to the Bible. So the first thing I want to do is I want to pull up Job, and I'm going to read parts out of Job chapter 40. Very, very fascinating book. So where might I want to start here? Okay, let me start. Okay, I'm looking for the first verse that I want to start in. I'm looking for the word behemoth. I don't. Oh, okay. Here it is. Here it is. It's starting in verse 15. And of course, in this context here, the Lord is dealing with Job and mildly, gently reproving him. And in the sense, he's also indirectly reproving his friends who've already been directly reproved. And God says, look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the earth of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with the shade. The willows by the brook surround him. Indeed, the river may rage, but he is not disturbed. So think about this. I think he's describing here a brontosaurus. His tail is like a cedar tree. Now, If you look at the biggest land animals that we have now, like the elephant and the hippopotamus, many of the commentaries will claim that this animal here is a hippo or an elephant. And I don't think there's any way under the sun this could be true. I mean, when you think about what it says, what animal on earth today has a tail like a cedar tree? Well, none of them. But we know when we dig up the skeletons of these ancient giants like the Brontosaurus that they definitely had a tail like a cedar tree. Now, it didn't have branches on it like a cedar tree, but its tail was as thick and tapered as a cedar tree. So it was very, very long, very tall. And what animal today has ribs that are like beams of bronze and ribs like bones like bronze and ribs like bars of iron? And here in verse 19, only God can come near the Brontosaurus or whatever creature this was with the sword. This does not apply to hippos and elephants. Man has been hunting hippopotamuses and elephants from the beginning of mankind actually hunting animals. It just absolutely does not fit. So, once you enter into the world of the Bible-believing Christian, it's so much easier to harmonize the Bible and science. Science does not prove that these animals lived millions and millions and millions of years ago. To come to conclusions like that, you have to date the geologic strata by the bones that are in them, and then you date the bones by the geologic strata that they're in. This is circular reasoning. And this is how this presuppositional theoretical science advances. It lives and dies by the philosophy of evolution. Folks, we want to live and die by the teachings of the Bible. Just take the Bible at face value. But let's move on to Job chapter 1. Let me see if I can, I got to make this box a little smaller so I can scroll up and see my chapters there. Okay. Chapter 41. And here we read about the Leviathan, which was a river creature. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? So here, folks, little rabbit trail, throw this in for free. Sometimes people think that fishing with the hook is a modern invention. But here in Job chapter 41, we got people fishing with a line which is lowered into the water. And they catch creatures and fish with a hook. At any rate, can you put a reed through his nose or pierce his jaw with the hook? This is talking about if you had a fishing pole big enough and line strong enough and a big bad plug with strong hooks on it, you wouldn't be able to set the hook into the jaws of this creature. The hook wouldn't pierce it. Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak softly to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Or will you leash him for your maidens? Will your companions make a banquet with him? Will they apportion him among the merchants? This is talking about the fact of domestication. You're not going to be able to have a quiet relationship with this creature like you could with a dog or a cat or a cow or a horse. There's no agreement, formal or informal, between man and this creature. You can't make him your servant. You can't domesticate him. Folks, in ancient history, the Chinese and other cultures domesticated some species of dragons just like we domesticate cattle and horses and dogs and cats. But this one, there's absolutely no way. You're not going to play with him. Now, it also says in verse 7, can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? You can't pierce the armor on this creature. Will you lay your hand on him? No, you're never going to do it again. You'll remember the battle and you'll never do it again. Any hope of overcoming him is false. No one shall not one of them is going to be overwhelmed, or some translations, shall not people be overwhelmed at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. Who is able to stand against him or against me? Who has preceded me that I should pay him? Anyway, as we go on, verse 12 says, I will not conceal his limbs, his mighty power, his graceful proportions. Who can remove his outer court? Who can approach him with a bridle? Who can open the doors of his face with his terrible teeth all around? His scales are his pride. They're shut as tightly as with the seal. And it goes on. We read in verse 18, his sneezings flash forth light. In other words, he breathes fire. His eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils. This just goes on and on. That the whole chapter is talking about this creature. There is nothing like him, verse 33, on earth, which is made without fear. He's the king over all the children of pride. So you've got this gigantic creature here that lives in the water, lives in the ocean, lives in the river, lives in lakes. The first one, the behemoth, I think is probably a brontosaurus or something in that family. This one here, the leviathan, is probably a mosasaurus or something along that lines. I'm not going to go to Isaiah, but in Isaiah 14:29 and Isaiah 30, verse 6, we also read about flying fiery serpents or flying fiery serpents. Doesn't really matter which way you go with it. These are flying serpents that breathe fire. Folks, this isn't just a fairy tale. We don't just see this on certain television shows like the Game of Thrones with fire-breathing dragons. We see this in ancient history. Not just in the Bible do we read about it, but we see it in ancient historical records where people mention these things, the secular records. Now, there's also extra biblical accounts. If you go to the Native American, tales that are passed on from father to son for many, many generations, many of these tribes speak about dragons. For instance, the Brule people mention water monsters that lived in the large lakes and rivers. In the Iroquois, talk about a gigantic horned serpent that lived in Lake Ontario. This horned serpent was big enough that it could take down mastodons and mammoths. I want you to think about that. This is not a crocodile. This is something much bigger than a crocodile. This creature had horns coming out of his head, and it was a tremendously terrifying creature. But let's talk about the extinction event that brought these creatures to their demise here in North America. I wouldn't say that it was and killed every last one of them, because that's probably an overstatement, but it brought their end to such a degree that the Native Americans called this time the end of the dragons, and they called it the time of the end of the great land animals. Now, if we're going to, the Bronze Age here, and I think that this big common event we're going to talk about was actually the same one that was at the time of the Exodus. It was the one that ended the Bronze Age. This was a mighty comet. I suspect it was probably the planet Venus, which ancient history tells us used to have an elliptical orbit, and that this elliptical orbit was a cometary orbit, that it would at times would be far away from Earth, similar to the planet Venus, its distance today, and it'd just be a little dot. And other times it would be extremely close to Earth. It would at times be as large as the moon in the sky. And there's times it was so large it would practically fill the entire sky and terrify the entire Earth and cast fire on Earth. Now, we can be skeptical about this if we want, but I want to point out that if we're going to trust the statements of ancient history, when it talks about dragons and talks about giants and talks about stuff of that nature, why wouldn't we trust it when it talks about the planets being in cometary orbits and throwing fire on Earth? Why wouldn't we trust it when it talks about this is why these people actually worship the planets as gods? They worship Mars as a god of war. They worshiped Venus as a two-faced witch that sometimes was very kind to you and sometimes was very mean to you. And if you offended Venus, she would spew fire on you. This is terrifying stuff, and that's the world that these people lived in. Now, this helps us to enter a little bit more into the dilemma of the ancients. If you stand from our perspective looking back in history and you wonder, how in the world were those people so brain dead that they worshiped that little red dot, Mars, and they were terrified of it? And why would they worship that little, that big marble dot, Venus? And why were they terrified of Venus? Why did they regard them as the god of war, trampling countries and throwing fire on Earth? They don't do that today. So it's confusing. But if you can go back into their time and realize that these planets were in elliptical orbits, they were the male god Mars and the female god Venus. They were Baal. They were Ashtaroth. This is why people worshiped them. This is why they were so terrified they would offer their children in sacrifice, trying to appease the gods. They lived in absolute terror. Now, we are going to look at some of the tales of this massive thunderbird from some North American tribes, and we're going to look at some, at least one from Mexico, from the Aztecs. But in the Central American and South American peoples talked about they called it Quetzalcoatl, which was and the North American Indians called it the Thunderbird. This massive comet, when it came across, it dropped tens of thousands of fireballs in one brief period of time, widespread areas across North America and South America. And earlier in its race across the surface of the earth, it had done the same thing in Asia and Europe, the Middle East. Excuse me. Whoo, had to yawn there for a second. And also across North Africa. And there was fire that fell from heaven. It was followed the next day by a massive wall of water, and it was followed by many, many days of cloud and rain. And in some of the accounts, it mentions that this event here was the beginning of the end of the Ice Age. This is when the Ice Age began to retreat. Prior to this, some of the Native American tribes in the Midwest, like the Indians from places like Iowa and up into Minnesota, they had a massive wall of ice that they could see, and the wall of ice was like a mountain. But after this time, this wall of ice started to retreat. So what's interesting about this is you end up getting the same geologic information that you get from secular science, but you take this 70 million year window and you crunch it down to a very short window that's actually in recorded history. I find it fascinating that you can have a group of evidence here of a burn layer and cometary impact, and you find dinosaur bones with it, and they say this one's 70 million years old. You find another one over here at this looks like the same burn layer, but it's accompanied with megafauna from the so-called Ice Age, and they date it at 13,000 or 20,000 years ago, or whatever they're going to date it. And the fact of the matter is, both of these events are very close together. Now, it's potentially some of these sites are going to obviously be Bronze Age sites, and some are going to, if it's below the Bronze Age, it's going to be a Silver Age site. And if it's below that one, it's going to be the Gold Age site, which, and by the way, in some of the literature, you're going to read of the First Age, the Second Age, and the Third Age, because that's what most of the literature calls them, but it's the same thing. But anyway, you have all this stuff compressed into just like 1,200 years or 1,500 years of history rather than, and it's in recent human recorded history rather than 70 million years of history. The simpler solution is always the best solution. Now, I'm going to take us through here in the next few minutes. I'm going to look at, I think I got 6 or 7 different accounts that I'm going to read that's like a half a page to a page long from North American tribes, from the Lakota all the way down to the Navajo and the Aztec. And this is just going to describe what they saw. Not every one of these tales has all of the details of the overall picture, but all of them mention at least 2 or 3 of the major events that affected them. Almost all of them mention the flood. Many of them and the death of the giant animals in the flood. Many of them mention the stones that fall from heaven and the fire that falls from heaven. And some of them mention both of them in conjunction. A lot of them are going to mention giant animals. They're going to mention, some of them mention dragons. Some of them mention a wall of ice. Some of them mention giant non-humans. Some of them mention the water monsters. We're going to see some of this stuff in these passages. So let me just open up to the first one here. And the first one I want to read is from the Lakota, who were Native Americans that were in the Dakota area. And here they have what this story is called, The Battle with Giant Animals. In the world before this one, so it's talking about the Bronze Age, because we're in the 4th age now, the people and the animals turned to evil and forgot their connection to the Creator. Resolving to destroy the world and start over, the Creator warned a few good people to flee to the highest mountaintops. When they were safe, the Creator sang the song of destruction and sent down fierce thunderbirds to wage a great battle against the other humans and the giant animals. They fought for a long time because the evil humans and the evil animals had become very powerful and neither side could gain an advantage. So let me just stop and take a quick little break here, throw some thoughts in here. You were living at a time when mankind was not merely hunting animals for food. They were hunting these major animals. It was a war. They were warring against these large animals because the large animals were warring against them. It was either kill these large animals or be killed. This was a survival situation. And God looked down from heaven and saw this. And of course, in their estimation, they feel that God was judging the world over because of this war. Finally, at the height of the battle, the Thunderbirds suddenly threw down their most powerful thunderbolts all at once. The fiery blast shook the entire world, toppling mountain ranges, think about that, and setting forests and prairies ablaze. The flames leapt up to the sky in all directions, sparing only the few people on the highest peaks. It was so hot that the world's lakes boiled and dried up before their eyes. Even the rocks glowed red hot, and the giant animals and evil people burned up where they stood. Now, I want you to catch this. These people did not get this story from the Bible and make up their own version. They had this story long before a white man brought the Bible to them. They're talking about the Creator. They're talking about the Creator bringing judgment on the world. I want you to think about that. And the Creator delivering good people and judging the bad people. After the earth finished baking, the Creator began to make a new world. And as the Creator chanted the song of creation, it began to rain. The Creator sang louder and it rained harder until the rivers overflowed their banks and surged across the baked landscape. Finally, the Creator stamped the earth, and with a great quake, the earth split open, sending great torrents of water surging across the entire world until only a few mountain peaks stood above the flood. sheltering the few people who had survived. After the waters cleansed the earth and subsided, the Creator sent the surviving people out to populate the new world, our world today, warning them not to fall into evil or the Creator would destroy the world again. As the people went out over the land, they found the bleached bones of the giant animals buried in rock and mud all over the world. People still find them today in the Dakota Badlands. And this story was retold in 1984 from the traditional storytellers in the Lakota people, and it was given to scientists and researchers to record and write down. Now, I want to point out another thing here. If you don't figure this out or understand, you'll get confused when you're looking into the books that talk about these great catastrophes. In the ancient world, there were 4 floods, not one. There's only one flood that was a universal flood that covered every high mountain on planet Earth, and that's Noah's flood. And that flood is talked about in many of the ancient cultures. But many of those same cultures have 4 floods. There was a tsunami flood at the time of the Gold Age. There was a tsunami flood at the time of the end of the Silver Age, and there was another tsunami flood at the time of the Bronze Age. That one's called Deucalion's flood in the Greek mythology. And some of the parts of the world, they didn't have a flood associated with all of these, but they always had a catastrophe that was associated with a massive comet and a judgment that fell from heaven. So when you understand this, you're going to realize that we're here, it says it transitions from the last age to this age, and it's talking about the judgment that ended the Bronze Age, and we are now in the 4th age. We're still there. We haven't had a judgment big enough to end the 4th age. And many of these ancient cultures warn us that the 4th age is going to end by a gigantic earthquake. Well, that's the same message we see in the Bible, isn't it? Now, it's also fascinating that once you understand this, you realize most of the creation tales or the recreation of the world at the end of this judgment. It's not talking about a recreation after Noah's flood. There was actually several recreations. This was the last recreation. Anyway, so let me read another one here. This one here is from the Ojibwa people. And this one here is called the long-tailed heavenly climbing star. Once, long, long ago, Chimantu, the great spirit, visited the Ojibwa tribe who lived near the edge of the frozen lands. The frozen lands is a reference to that part of the land that was covered with that giant sheet of ice. Chimantu warned them that a dangerous star was about to fall and urged them to hurry to the bog to cover their bodies with mud. Folks, this is pretty amazing. God warned these people to flee from the judgment, and some of them obeyed. Most people did not recognize the Great Spirit and made fun of Chimantu. Do not listen. That man is just a crazy person. And they laughed at him. Cover ourselves with mud. Ha ha, that's a funny one, they said as they went on their way and paid no more attention to the Great Spirit. Only a few hurried on to the bog as Chimantu suggested. Before long, when the sun was high, the day suddenly grew brighter. The people all looked up in a panic and someone shouted, "Look, a second sun is in the sky." The new star was growing larger, brighter, and hotter as it hurtled toward them. It became so bright they had to shield their eyes. The people who had not covered themselves with mud ran for shelter in terror, but it was too late. The star flew down to earth and blanketed the world with its long, flowing, glowing tail. Tall trees burst into flame like giant torches. Lakes and rivers began to boil. and even the rocks glowed and shattered from the heat, as terrible fires swallowed up the entire world. Then suddenly, when the heat was the greatest and the people in the bog thought even they would surely die, the star climbed back up and moved away from Earth. As the world cooled down, the mud-covered people cautiously came out of the bog to look around. Stunned, they saw that the world had changed completely. In all directions, all that remained were smoldering, blackened trees and scorched grasslands. The people who had not listened to Shamantu had perished, along with all the giant animals. Only their skeletons remained. The people were afraid and did not know what to do until Shamantu came to them and said, "Put aside your fear. The star is gone for now. Go and multiply, for this new world is yours. But if I come to warn you another time, do not forget to listen, because the long-tailed heavenly climbing star will surely come back again to destroy the world." I find this quite fascinating. Here is another account from the Pawnee tribe. In the beginning, before making people, Tirawa, the creator, decided to create giant creatures to live in this world. Tirawa made them in many shapes, but in several ways they were all alike. They were very big and very strong. Today you might call them ugly, but Tirawa was happy with them. After the giant creatures began to roam all over the earth, they gradually forgot about the creator. Being so big and powerful, they did whatever they wanted. After a while, they began fighting with each other to see who was the greatest and most powerful amongst them. So we see the effect of the curse getting into nature. This led to many fierce struggles, and their constant fighting tore up the forests, dug up the prairies, and knocked down the mountains. Because they were so strong, there was great destruction. Finally, Tirawa became angry with the great animals, stretching out a hand over the land. Tirawa called on the waters to rise, rain began to fall, and water began to bubble up from the deep. Rivers overflowed their banks in a great flood that spread across the land. Everywhere there was water, but it was not deep, and the giant animals were tall, so at first they were not afraid. But then their feet began to stick in the mud, and they sank into the soft ground, first to their ankles, then to their knees, and then to their shoulders. They tried to escape, but the more they struggled, the faster they went down, until at last every one of them sank beneath the water into the flood. When Tirawa saw that all of them were finished, then God waved a hand over the land, making hot breezes blow and causing the sun to dry out the earth. Next, Tirawa fashioned a man and a woman, but Tirawa made them smaller, not giant size, so they would not be so destructive. Tirawa also gave them some corn, showed them how to grow it as food, and sent them out into the land. They lived and multiplied, and today all Pawnees are descended from these two original people. Now, when the Pawnee walk along the riverbank, sometimes they find giant bones sticking out of the silt in the mud. These are the bones from the creatures that Tirawa drowned. So I could continue reading on this material for quite a long time here. I think I'll just call this good for now, and there's a lot more material for later ventures in this. But you're starting to get the idea. These peoples were familiar with the giant star or giant comet. It rained fire on the earth. It burned things up. It was followed by a flood. Some of them mentioned a wall of water coming in. Some of them mentioned that it rained for all these days. But all of them have a tremendous flood associated with it. Now, the points that we see in these stories, and I'll mention a few points that we didn't see in the three that we read, but they're mentioned regularly in these stories. There's fire, there was flood, there was rocks that fell from heaven. The lakes were formed, many, many lakes. The major animals were buried in the mud. Now, another thing that appears in these stories is the many years of darkness. I find this fascinating, which is one of the reasons why I correlate. I mean, there's a number of things why I would correlate this event with the Bronze Age and the Exodus, but one of the big ones is that we have the years of darkness. Now, many of the Native American tribes only speak of 20 to 30 years of darkness. But when you're in the more Middle East, North Africa, Southern Europe, you often read about 40 years of darkness. Some of them will say 38, some will say 42. It averages around 40 years of darkness, and some of them specifically say 40 years of darkness. I harmonize this with the 40 years that Israel wandered in the wilderness. In the Middle Eastern literature, they talk about a time of great darkness, a great dark ages that followed the collapse of the last great what in the world would you call it? Well, the last great pharaohs, really. So in Egypt, and it was followed by some dark ages before they crawled their way back into advanced civilization. This dark age was characterized by literal darkness that was all over the Middle East. In fact, I think it was all over the world. You couldn't see the sun. You couldn't see the moon. You couldn't see the stars. There was no way to navigate by the stars. And remember, people, they didn't have compasses. So they couldn't navigate without the stars, the sun, and the moon. They needed them. So if you look up in the heavens, it was so thickly covered with clouds in the heavens because there was ash and dust and soot in the air from this cometary visitation and from volcanoes exploding and from the great fires. You're not going to see the sun. Now, you're not going to know where the sunrise is, where the sunset is. You can't tell if you're going north, south, east, or west. There's nothing to guide you. You can only walk by known landmarks. This is why the Lord guided the children of Israel in the wilderness with a cloudy pillar by day and a fiery pillar by night. I mean, once I saw this, comparing history with the Bible, I got so excited I could hardly stand it. I mean, this is a tremendous insight. Israel literally needed the Lord there. They couldn't follow the stars. I mean, they couldn't ask a local tribesman, hey, can you tell us the route to get on the other side over there to get over to the land of Canaan? They couldn't ask for those directions because the people would tell them to get on such and such a trail, but they don't know the trail. How do they know they're still on the trail? And they couldn't get directions. Well, just keep going east. Just follow the sun. First you go north for a little ways, then you go east or whatever. They couldn't do that. They couldn't follow the stars. There was nothing to follow. They needed that cloudy pillar and that fiery pillar, or there was no way to get through the wilderness. And so now, once you understand this point and you start studying ancient history, you're going to find some very interesting phenomenon that spring up all over the place. You're going to find people talking about the time when there was no sun. It's like, what? I mean, if no sun existed, then life would die not just in 10 years. Wouldn't even take a year, wouldn't even take a month. It would just, within a week, the whole earth would be a frozen block of ice. But so when they're talking about there is no sun, they can only be talking about an era when the sun was masked or covered by this massive cloud cover, atmospheric cloud cover, and you can't see the sun. And of course, it would bring what science calls impact winter, and it would be cold. And then, of course, the sun would first appear a number of years later. But now you got the sun. Now you know where the sunrise and sunset is. At first, you wouldn't see a distinct sun. At first, you would only see that glowing through the clouds. And, you know, if you'd been a number of years without seeing that glow in the clouds, can you imagine how exciting it was to see that glow again? I mean, think about how excited we get when we see a sunrise or a sunset. And they've been missing that for years, and all of a sudden you can see the sun again. Not really fully all the way, but you can see it. And another interesting story about this is we know that the Lord provided the children of Israel with manna when they were in the wilderness. Because there was not enough sunlight for most vegetation to thrive or grow. It was just darkness. You needed the cloudy pillar by day and the fiery pillar by night. The sunlight was greatly reduced. The Lord fed them with manna. Now, here's what's interesting. There are other cultures around the world that record, like the Vedic literature in India, talks about the Lord offering to the godly the provision of gathering manna and surviving. So, I mean, in the Bible, we see what the Lord is doing to preserve the children of Israel in the wilderness. Very particular story, very particular reference is the line of redemption. But the Lord also showed grace at the same time to other peoples around the world. He provided manna for them too. Now, ultimately, first you saw the sun, and then after a few more years, you could see the moon, which reflects the sun's light. And then eventually, you're going to see the first planet. Eventually, you're going to see Venus. And then as the cloud cover starts to ameliorate, then you're going to see other planets, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and then you're going to start seeing stars. And this is why when you're starting to see the planets and you're starting to see the stars, this is why in Greek mythology and in some of the other Middle Eastern mythology, you read about when such and such a god first appeared in the heavens. They're remembering back to this time when Mars first appeared, when Venus first appeared, when this constellation first appeared, when that star first appeared. These mythology tales are actually giving us observational history through the lens of their traditions and their tales. They're telling us what they literally saw in the heavens. And here's another rabbit trail on this. When you read Greek mythology and you read a tale about like the god Sisyphus, who was condemned, the minor god Sisyphus, condemned to Hades. And every year he'd try and roll a rock to the top of the mountain. And if he could actually crawl out to the top of the mountain, then he would escape Hades. But every year he would just barely make it to the top, and then he would go back down. And he never escaped. Well, once you understand that these mythologies are talking in the earliest stage about the giants or the Nephilim that lived on earth, the god people. And then when they died, it's talking about them being in the heavens because they associated these gods with the things in the heavens. And then it's talking later on about these same gods appearing again. So here, let me give you another illustration here. I'll just leave that point go. Just bear in mind that we're talking about these gods in the heavens. It makes a lot of sense once you understand that. Now let's look at some of the evidence for this Bronze Age event that's all across North America. Now, remember, we heard about a thunderbird, and it brought thousands upon thousands of thunderbirds with it. And they impacted the earth. Now, I find it fascinating that all around the Midwest, there are literally tens of thousands of lakes that are in general slightly oblong. They're not perfectly round. Some of them are more round, but many of them are a little bit oblong. And many of them have an orientation. The farther south you go, it's more like southeast to northwest. And if you get up closer towards the equal latitude with the Great Lakes, then they're oriented actually towards the Great Lakes. It's very fascinating. So makes you wonder if you didn't have a situation where this massive, at least a gigantic fragment came down, broke into a few pieces, slammed in to the area of the Great Lakes, made that area of the Great Lakes, and then these fragments were spreading in all different directions from there. Just a thought. But anyway, there's tens of thousands of them. And when you view them from the air, there's a visible impact ring. Now, you can't typically see the impact ring when you're standing on the ground. But when you're up in the air with an airplane, a hot air balloon, or you're looking at photographs, you can see that they have an impact ring around them. And when you do a soil evaluation of the impact ring, you're going to find all kinds of impact indicators. And by impact indicators, I mean not just indication that something impacted, but that you had an extraterrestrial body from out of Earth impact. And so you're going to find stuff like interesting spherules. You're going to find melt glass, which is glass that's made on impact. You're going to find nanodiamonds. There's some places where 1 tablespoon of soil literally has thousands of nanodiamonds. You're going to find hexagonal diamonds, which is, instead of the normal cubic diamond, a hexagonal diamond, the molecular structure has 6 sides, a hexagonal instead of octagonal, or instead of a quadrangle. So a hexagonal diamond is actually 50% stronger than a regular cubic diamond. And you're going to also find platinum. You're going to find in high amounts. You're going to find iridium in 100 times higher than you find it in normally in Earth. And you're going to find other exotic minerals and metals that can only be explained by this extraterrestrial cometic impact. So very, very fascinating. Now, another thing that's similar to this, on the Atlantic seaboard, you find very similar things. They call them Carolina Bays there. They're primarily in Alabama and Mississippi, but no, pardon me, they're in the Carolinas. That's the Grady Ponds are in Mississippi and Alabama, but they're also found all the way along the Atlantic seaboard. They're very similar, but this is mostly a sandy area rather than a loamy soil area. And the Carolina Bays are actually not like a bay and a lake. It's kind of a mistaken terminology. They're actually lakes, swamps, boggy ground, and at times even just a dry basin. But they all have the same characteristics. You find the same extraterrestrial markers in their impact rim. And of course, this is in the sandy area, so you're going to have a much higher percentage of what we call impact glass or melt glass. When you find it in North Africa, there they call it Libyan glass. It's the same thing. That's a different story. But now there's also in Mississippi and Alabama, along the Gulf Coast, you find Grady Ponds, and they have a very similar characteristics. They're the impact rim and extraterrestrial markers. Now, another facet, of course, all of these things talking about in a massive, massive impact, or maybe a series of impacts. Now, another interesting thing here that we find in North America is that we have 2 layers right next to each other. Sometimes there's a very thin micro layer in between them, but that's the Clovis layer and the Burn layer. Now, the Clovis layer is the layer that contains ancient stone tools with things like Clovis points, Clovis spear points, Clovis arrowhead points, Clovis knives, and things of that nature. They call them Clovis points because they're made by the Clovis people. But in this layer, you're going to find mammoths and mastodons and other of the large Ice Age era animals. It's a fascinating layer. Now, what's interesting is above this, you find the Burn layer. And when you go above this Burn layer, you've got 2-3 layers in some areas where there is no human remains, there's no animal remains, or on a very rare occasion, you might find just a small fragment or something. But for the most part, there's no remains in the 2 or 3 layers above these. It's like there was an extinction event. And then you start finding human remains and animal remains again. It's a very fascinating phenomenon. And those that are familiar with archaeology, whether they're armchair archaeologists, do a lot of reading, or whether they're actual archaeologists and they do work with the Clovis layer and the burn layer, they're going to know what I'm talking about. And they're probably going to be able to throw a little bit more light on the subject if you're interested. Now, on this era here, this area where we're talking about the burn layer, a lot of people refer to this strata here as the Younger Dryas boundary. They claim that this boundary is about 13,000 years ago. I think that that's a mistake. I myself would associate it with the end of the Bronze Age. This is going to put it about 3,500 years ago. That brings the dragons much closer to us. It brings the Ice Age animals much closer to us. It brings the Clovis people much closer to us. Now, one of the reasons that people get these dates wrong, well, there's several reasons. One of them, they often do carbon dating. And carbon dating is a mistaken dating system. Carbon dating is only accurate for its own immediate area. And if you don't start with the right foundation in the right rating for your area, your carbon dating is going to be off for your area because it's only relative dating. It's not absolute dating. And that's the big mistake that people make. What people don't understand is we had these extraterrestrial impacts coming all over North America. Some areas it was very thick, other areas it was moderately thick, some areas it was thin. And they all brought different amounts of C14 with them. And so when you're looking for carbon deterioration, you're going to end up finding different amounts. And if you think that every place had the same amount and they're all deteriorating at the same rate, then you're going to come up with mistaken dates. But if the amounts that you start with are all over the map and in 100 square mile area, it could range from very light to very heavy. And then you start with those deterioration rates, you've got no way to know for sure how much time has transpired and where you're supposed to put the date on your timeline because you don't know where you started from. So there's a tremendous problem in using the carbon dating. Now, sometimes people will also date soil layers, they'll date ice layers, and they'll date even tree rings, but you have problems with all of these dating systems. Now, secular science looks at this burn layer, this Younger Dryas boundary, and they see anomalies here that speak of cometary impact. So this isn't just my opinion. This is secular science saying, yes, this is cometary impact. Now, not all scientists agree with that, and there's a reason for it. Most of them don't want this degree of gigantic catastrophe this close to us. They want to push this way, 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 way out there, so they don't want it this close to us. But some of them are actually going to be reasonably honest with the data. Now, they look at this as a giant burning event that took out all the mega animals like the mammoths and the mastodons. And the other thing they point out, there's a tremendous amount of soot and ash and volcanic ash in the sediment here. And there was a lot of dust in the sediment that deposited over a number of years as it made the layer. And they look at this, they call this the impact winter effect. They see that they hypothesize from the amount of this dust that's here and the ash that's there, that the atmosphere had been filled with it after the impact, and then all this dust and ash settled as the impact winter slowly retreated. Now, I mentioned earlier about the stuff that's the extraterrestrial markers are in this layer, and I'll mention some more here again, but there's tremendous amounts of palladium, platinum group metals. There's a tremendous amount of iridium at 100 times the rate that's normally found on Earth. There's nanodiamonds, there's hexagonal diamonds, there's exotic minerals and metals that are associated only with impact events. Now, when they're dating this, of course, they're looking for cores. They get the cores from the ice, they get the cores from the glaciers, they get cores from lake sediment, from marine sediment, from terrestrial sediment, and they take these cores, they look at the layers, and they harmonize this, and they come to this event that they call the Younger Dryas boundary with the Younger Dryas event. And they typically date this at 13,000 years ago, though some will go a little longer or a little shorter. But again, if we trust the biblical timeline and how this lines up, when we know we have to shorten up the horizon for all these events, because we're dealing with 6,000 years total. And at these events here, we're dealing with post-flood events. So we only really have about 4,500 years from the flood to the present day. And all these events that we're looking at, whether the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, the Gold Age, and the flood itself, we've only got like a 4,500 year window. So if we're looking at something that's after the flood and after the Gold Age and after the Silver Age, we're looking at something that's probably about 3,500 years ago. So there's a lot of cool information here, and I'm not going to go much farther into it tonight. Just make a few closing observations. I think we've got our feet wet here. But I want to revisit the idea, because this is a helpful insight for you for your discernment in your research. You got to bear in mind when you're looking at creation tales in ancient history, you need to try and find indications whether they're talking about the flood that covered all the mountains at the time of Noah, and some of those ancient traditions will go to that flood, or whether you're talking about one of the later three floods, the Gold Age, Silver Age, or the Bronze Age. And you're going to have to, and some of the accounts are not going to be distinctive. So you're just going to have to say, well, it could be any of these two or any of these three. But some of them are going to have distinctive factors in them. They're going to help you locate that it's a Bronze Age. Some of the distinctive factors is, like here in North America, talking about the Thunderbird. In South America, talking about Quetzalcoatl. If it's talking about the wall of ice that's there and then it starts to retreat, we're talking about the Bronze Age. So you're going to be able to connect stuff like this. Also, the same with the flood tales. You can't just decide that every flood tale in the literature around the world is talking about Noah's flood, because there were four floods. One flood that covered the whole world, and three floods that were just tsunami floods that washed in, and people survived by escaping the mountaintops. So the last flood was called Deucalion's flood. Now, this last flood, Deucalion's flood, this is the time of this Bronze Age impact. This is where the Mycenaean Empire ended and the Minoan Empire ended, or some people would say the Minoan, in the Mediterranean. These great cultures ended there. This is the time when there's an absolutely massive burn layer in the Middle East, North Africa, South Europe. This is when the North Sea peoples were busy invading the Mediterranean and setting up the Carthaginian and Syrophoenician empires. This era here is also when you had a massive wave of the Nephilim giants leaving the Middle East, leaving Canaan and moving to the West. Of course, that was a little bit later, because they fled after the time of Joshua, but it's in this general area. So with these kind of markers, I hope you've getting a little bit of insight into just some of the basic timeline events to get your mind wrapped around the biblical timeline and how it associates with the secular timeline. And once a person enters into this stuff, it becomes extremely fascinating. So at any rate, I'll just wrap the lecture up here, and let's move into our Q&A time. And let me pull up my questions here. And we have a ton of unanswered questions. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take on tonight's questions first, and then we're going to move on to unanswered questions. The reason I want to do that is I'm sure people asked a lot of questions about the subject here tonight. All right. Yeah, in fact, here's a comment. Please do these first. Yes, that's a good comment. All right, question number 1. When did the Bronze Age start? Great question. Now, if you're going to be reading the secular archaeological historical literature, you're going to typically read that the Bronze Age is approximately 3000 BC to approximately 1200 BC. Some people will take it back to 3200 BC or even a little farther, but it's typically in this range. Now, there's a couple problems here with it. I think if we're going to be specifically follow the outline of ancient recorded history by the ancient historians themselves, the Bronze Age is going to extend from about 1450 to somewheres like 1800, 1850 BC, 1900 BC, wherever you're going to put Abraham. It's the time of Abraham with Sodom and Gomorrah down to the time of the Exodus. People that have put a tremendous amount of time into biblical chronology are going to be able to nail down these dates a little bit better. Typically, evangelical scholars put the Exodus somewheres around 1450 BC. Now, the reason that secular science dates the Bronze Age to around 1200 is that they have a miserable chronology when they try and line up the Bible with Egypt. They make a lot of mistakes, and so they're going to put the assuming, right, that the biblical chronology can actually be trusted and it's actually history, they would put Israel's Exodus, if it really is real, around 1200 BC. And I think that's a mistake. Typically Egyptian chronology is off about 250 to 300 years on this stretch. Other places it can be off even 1,000 years. So when did the Bronze Age start? Secular says around 3000 BC to 1200 BC. Is it stretched? And they would start at around 3000 BC. If we trust ancient history in the chronology that it's laid out around the world, then the Bronze Age would start around the time of Abraham and Sodom. So the Bronze Age started when the Silver Age came to an end. That would be the destruction of Sodom. Okay, have you gone to the ark that is located in the United States? If you're talking about Ken Ham's ark, yes, I did. That was very, very fascinating. If you're talking about Noah's ark, I didn't know there was one here. But that ark, I found it super fascinating. When I went there with Pete Garcia, and I was thinking it's probably going to be kind of cheesy. And we got to the ark. I walked in, and there was nothing cheesy about it at all. I think it was very well done. It was an amazing experience. That ark is so insanely big that I was just shocked how big it is. It doesn't look that big on the outside, but when you get on the inside, it's huge. The only downside to the ark that I thought was there is I thought the food in the cafeteria was mediocre. Maybe they can fix that someday. Okay. Does Lee think that the earth is millions of years old? No, Lee does not think that the earth is millions of years old. If there is any kind of a gap at all between the creation of the heavens and the earth and the 6 days of creation, it's only days or weeks or months or a couple of years. The morning stars or the sons of the morning were there when the Lord laid the foundations of the earth. That's what we have. I don't believe there was a pre-Adamite race here. I don't think the dinosaurs were in a different creation. I don't think the earth is millions of years old, much less billions of years old. I think we're perfectly safe to regard the earth as 6,000 years old. And if there's a few days or weeks or months or years added to that, it's the dust in the scale. We're really dealing with the 6,000 year young earth chronology when we're dealing with the Bible and we're dealing with the geological phenomena that we see on earth. That's what we're limited to. I don't see any escape from that. If you're going to be a biblicist, if you are going to be a literal, historical, grammatical, hermeneutic person. Okay, is there any possibility that the dragon in the sea in Isaiah 27 could be the original serpent Satan used to deceive Eve? Sorry for the weird question. Well, there's actually no weird questions. Well, I shouldn't say that. There might be weird questions, but I don't regard this as a weird question. The dragon in the sea in Isaiah 27, let's pull that one up. Isaiah 27. And we're reading here about Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, that twisted serpent that the Lord he's going to slay the reptile that's in the sea. Now, I think what we have going on when we deal with passages like this, we have a literal spiritual being, the literal Satan, the literal dragon, who is in the figurative sea of mankind. And a day's coming when he's literally going to be beaten. But I think also in some of these passages, we're going to, like in Revelation 12, when the dragon casts 1/3 of the stars to the ground, I think we're talking about a picture of the great red dragon in the heavens. That picture in the heavens is Mars. So at the very time that the literal dragon is literally cast to earth here in the middle of the tribulation, and he's going to be angry because he knows his time is short, at the exact same time, there'll be a picture of this happening in heaven when Mars is making a near pass of Earth, and Earth rolls, and the tail of Mars, because Mars is going to look like a comet. At that point, you come near to Earth, you're going to be looking like a comet. And that tail is going to look like it rolls the Earth. And when the Earth rolls, it's going to cause 1/3 of the stars in the northern hemisphere to fall below the horizon. Those stars are going to fall to Earth. And you're going to see a similar thing if you're in the south on the southern part of the Earth, the southern hemisphere. You're going to see stars falling to the horizon, and you're going to see new stars rising. And this is a changing of the heavens and a changing of the earth. So the dragon that's in the sea, is it the original serpent the dragon used to deceive Eve? I don't think so, because I think this dragon in the sea is actually going to be Satan himself. But it is interesting, the connection that we see between dragons and serpents on the one side, and then Satan, the great dragon. Okay, here's a great question. Bible critics say that it's impossible to fit all pairs of animals in an ark. But how do you think you can explain how all pairs of animals did fit in the ark? Well, for instance, let's just say, do two things here, or do two thought experiments here at the same time. One of them is we're going to take big specimens of all the animal creatures. So you march 2 massive brontosauruses on the ark, right? And 2 massive stegosauruses on the ark, and 2 massive T-Rexes on the ark, and a whole bunch of other massive dinosaurs, full grown. And then you march 2 massive elephants on the ark, full grown. You start doing this with all the animals on the earth, and you're going to have a problem. You won't fit them all on the ark. If you put adult size animals in there, and then you put adult amount of food in the ark, it's not going to work. So what I think God did, in fact, I know this is what God did because God's pretty smart. He brought infant or child size features. So you had two baby brontosauruses walk up to the ark, and Noah says, "Welcome aboard." Two baby T-Rexes, like the size of puppies, come scampering up. And Noah picks them up, pets them, puts them back down. They walk up the plank and they go in the ark. And he did this with all these animals. Now you only need tiny spaces for baby animals, and you only need tiny amounts of food for baby animals. Now it works. But we take another step that makes it even easier. So Noah didn't, let's just say dogs, for instance, Noah didn't take 187 varieties of dogs up there. The Lord sent him two dogs that had the genetic differentiations that he wanted, so that out of those two dogs, you could get, within a few generations, you'd have wolves, coyotes, and domesticated dogs. They all came out of the same one. And if here and there, maybe the Lord did have coyotes, wolves, and dogs, it's no big deal. There's still plenty of room. The ark is so big, when you go in there and you look, you realize there's room for 3 times as many more species as they put in there. It's insanely huge. Well, anyway, I think also the Lord didn't bring, African elephants and Indian elephants and other elephants and mastodons and mammoths and a few other things. He brought one pair that had enough genetic potential that their offspring would divide into all the species that we have. That's all you need. Okay, do I think that Bigfoot is an interdimensional being like a fallen angel or some sort of modern day Nephilim? Oh, here's another great question. And I have a super cool answer for you. Okay, here's my answer. I believe that Bigfoot is just a cryptozoology specimen. He's just an extinct species of ape that's not extinct. The Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, who I forget which university he works at in Idaho, and maybe he's retired by now, but he collected thousands of samples of Bigfoot tracks, Bigfoot hair, Bigfoot scat, and the tracks showed toe prints. They were primate toe prints. The scat was unknown primate scat. The hair was hair from an unknown primate. There was hundreds and hundreds of these samples. So there's no doubt that it's just a cryptoid animal. Now, here's the rub. This is where things get much more complicated. The fallen realm, when it deals with human beings, tends to play on our superstitions and our fears. So you go back 100 years, 150 years, almost all of the appearances of the fallen realm to mankind were gnomes, leprechauns, witches, dwarves, ogres, things of this nature, things that men were afraid of back then. When you fast forward to our day, most of the appearances today are grays and other species of, quote, UFOs, aliens. That's where we're at. So they exploit our fears. But now we've got at least a dozen, if not 24 years of these interdimensional beings exploiting the Bigfoot phenomena. So in areas where there are Bigfoot, I think we also have these fallen powers working with the Bigfoot phenomenon. I think it's possible that they masquerade as Bigfoot when they're not really Bigfoot. I think it's possible that they can maybe possess a Bigfoot. They're working with the Bigfoot. And some have postulated that perhaps some of the Nephilim mated with the Gigantopithecus, or the extinct ape, and became the what we call Bigfoot. I'm just a little hesitant to go there, but I can't rule that out, folks. I mean, we know that one of the spirit with the little s spirit, one of the spirit behind the Nephilim phenomenon is crossing things that shouldn't be crossed. Crossing man and angel, crossing angel and animal, crossing man, angel, and animal, crossing man and animal, crossing animal and animal, crossing plants that shouldn't be crossed. That's what they do. They want to defile the genetic creation. So I guess I'm open to the idea that at least some of the Bigfoot have this a mixture of Nephilim DNA in with them. It's entirely possible. I'm going to wait for further research. Right now, for me, that's just an idea that's possible. Is there any validity to Tartaria? Well, this idea here is we're talking about the idea of the mud flood. We're talking about that we're in Satan's little season, that the kingdom has already come and gone, that there was a destruction, and now we're living in we're living in Satan's little season after the kingdom. And the reason they go with this theory here is that you look at some of the glorious architecture that's in parts of Europe and parts of the world, and we realize we're not capable of that kind of architecture today. We just don't do it. And so we think we're in the fallen age here. That was the glorious kingdom age. And they look at stuff like that, and they look at parts of the world where if you dig down the archaeological layers, you find these glorious, glorious structures built with stone and massive monuments, beautiful archaeology, beautiful architecture. We don't have it today. Well, interesting observation, but let me give you two points. One is, the first one is that there's evidence it's absolutely impossible that we're in Satan's little season. And then we're going to look at why we don't see that architecture. So there's two different arguments. First of all, we can't be in Satan's little season. It's absolutely biblically impossible. The first reason is, if you actually take the millennium literally, Jesus is going to literally descend from heaven, literally establish a kingdom over the entire earth. He's going to be in control, not just of Jerusalem, not just of every continent, not just of every country, but every state and every county in every country, and every city and every village and every hamlet in every country. And when the millennium comes to an end, he does not relinquish control over any country, over any city, over any state, over any village. He's still in absolute control over the entire earth, and he's still ruling in Jerusalem. He's visibly sitting on a throne. We don't see that right now. If we had come to the end of the millennium and Satan was let loose, he gathers a bunch of malcontents from around the globe, a bunch of malcontents who are literally, they're not really an army that's worthy of the name, though he calls them an army because they're so vast. They're just a bunch of college-age malcontents doing an Occupy Wall Street protest. And fire comes down from heaven and destroys them. They don't take over any of the world. Satan does not re-extend his government over the world, much less any part of the world. I should say that the other way around. He doesn't extend his control over any part of the world, much less the whole world. He just has gathered a bunch of malcontents. They gather around Jerusalem, where Jesus is literally sitting on the throne. Folks, is Jesus literally sitting on the throne today? He's absolutely not sitting on the throne today. He's not here on earth today. He's not been physically on earth. And when we come to the end of the millennium, he doesn't leave the earth. He's still on earth. So we can't be in Satan's little season. And I could bring out a bunch more arguments like this. I have a video on Satan's little season. If you want to search for it, when you go to my YouTube channel, you don't go to the big search bar at the top of your browser, which is going to take you to all kinds of other people's YouTubes. You go to the little search bar on my YouTube channel and you search there, search for Satan's little season, or just put the word season in and it'll bring the video up. Now, some of these other arguments against Satan's little season are the fact that at the beginning of the millennium, we have a massive judgment on earth that shakes the entire globe. And this massive earthquake shakes every mountain on earth down, so it's no longer a mountain. And the hills it shakes down, so they're little hills instead of big hills. And every island in the sea vanishes, at least the ones that we know. The earth is, the seas are also going to drain. So when we come to, if we go through the 1,000 years and all the mountains are down and Jerusalem is the tallest mountain on the earth, then at the end of the 1,000 years, that's not going to change. Satan does not have the power to physically manipulate the earth to that degree. He can't just make all these mountains magically get big again and take and push Jerusalem back down again. He's not able to do that. And so we look around and we say, wait a minute, Jerusalem is not on Mount Zion, and with Mount Zion being the tallest mountain on earth. Right now, Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on earth, and there's thousands of mountains that are taller than Mount Zion. So folks, we can't be in Satan's little season, because if we were in Satan's little season, Mount Zion would be the tallest mountain on earth and all the other mountains would be lowered. Because we go from the millennium to Satan's little season, and those things are going to remain unchanged. Only thing that happens is Satan is let out of jail and he raises his big protest and then he's burned up with fire. So I could go on and on. There's more of these arguments why we can't be in Satan's little season. So let's talk just for a brief moment about why we don't see the glorious architecture that we used to see up until the late 1800s. And folks, it's really just a bunch of common sense and a bunch of nonsense all mixed together. All right. Here's the reason. If you wanted to have a glorious cathedral built today with stone that's built in the style of the stuff that was built in the 13, 14, 15, 1600s, a massive glorious cathedral, and you put a bunch of gold in it and a bunch of ornate rock work and a bunch of ornate tile work and a bunch of ornate stained glass, you're looking at a structure that nobody could afford to build. You had people working for slave wages, and some of them were literally serfs and slaves. You had people that were amazing craftsmen, but they were in bondage to the church and in bondage to the government, and they barely eked out a living. They were paid peanuts. And some of these projects working with people at this level went on for decades, and sometimes centuries, sometimes 100 or 200 years to finish a project. Now, if you were to go with today's hiring platform, and let's say some gigantic Catholic diocese today wanted to build a massive cathedral like we were building in the 1800s, the last ones, the glorious ones were built in the late 1800s, and you were to build something like that, I don't think they would come up with enough. Could you afford to pay all those workmen $40 or $50 an hour and to pay the people that do the ornate work? I mean, the amazingly delicate, intricate work, be paying them $100 an hour or more? It's inconceivable. We are literally moved into an era where we get lower quality work. And it's just the age that we're in. So if you're wanting glorious architecture again, folks, we get it back. When we step across that threshold in the rapture, we move into the eternal state. We got glorious architecture in New Jerusalem, and we're going to have glorious educational opportunities, and we're going to learn all kinds of cool things. And we're going to make friends with people that used to do stonework and used to do woodwork and used to do ornate work, people from Old Testament times, people from New Testament times. Ideas are going to be swapped. We're going to cross-pollinate ideas. We're going to mix old technology and modern technology and new technology. And once we get done with our kingdom time and we're moving off into the eternal state and we're going in every different direction in this glorious solar system, in this glorious universe, and we're building glorious structures, folks, we're going to have the time of our life. We're going to have all the glorious architecture we please. And the poorest saint in the church is going to be wealthier than all the wealthiest people in the history of the world put together. And the most miserly castle held by a believer is going to be more glorious than the most glorious castle ever in the history of the world. Well, that was a long-winded answer. I had fun answering that, but that was a long-winded answer on Tartaria. So bottom line is, let me just say this. If people start pushing the mud flood on you, just send them to my video on Satan's little season. That mud flood theory is complete garbage. Tartaria is complete garbage. I don't even know how to say it nicely. Hopefully I said that nice enough. It's just garbage. How do you say garbage nicely? I guess we just say garbage and smile. All right. Okay, where did the ocean life come from if there was no ocean at the time of the flood? Well, there was an ocean at the time of the flood, but those ocean bodies weren't as big as they are today. So if you notice, if you look at a map of the Atlantic Ocean and a map of the Pacific Ocean, you see these long, massive canyon channels going right down the middle of each of those basins. What those are is when the fountains of the deep cracked open at the time of the flood, and the fountains of the deep were open, that water came rushing up through those openings, and massive amounts of water that were in the bowels of the earth came up and flooded above. And as the chambers below emptied and the weight above got increased, that landmass came down. And that's when you look at the ocean basins, you see these steep walls where you have this shelf and then a steep drop, the continental shelf. And you had big chunks of land that just dropped. So the theory that I think is gaining prominence, I think it's the correct theory. The continents didn't drift apart, but the ocean basins just dropped, they sunk. And that doesn't mean that there's no continental plates. There actually are continental plates, and they bump and rub and create all kinds of problems, but it's a different thing. So the ocean life was already in the oceans, just the oceans expanded in size. Now, when we go back into the millennium, the ocean basins are going to shrink again. And when that water goes back in, I think we're going to see these pieces of earth pushed back up. And I wouldn't be surprised if all the continents are connected, or at least nearly connected, but we'll still have gigantic basins of water. In my book and in some of my videos on the millennium, I bring out that there is no more sea in Revelation 20, verse 1, can't be taken absolutely. It can only be taken relatively. The Bible's very clear that there's still oceans and seas in the millennium. They're filled with fish. People are still going to scuba dive, right? And they're still going to water ski in the millennium. What about whales and sharks? How did they get on the ark? Well, the creatures that lived in the sea were able to survive in the sea. So whether they were mammals like the whales, whether they were fish, whether they were crustaceans, whatever they were able to survive in the sea. Okay. Is it true that pastors from all over the country met recently with government officials and were told to prepare their congregations for alien disclosure? This was on CBN News. I haven't followed that story, only heard rumors about it, but we've known this was coming for a long, long time. If we're on the right track with the alien disclosure, this makes sense. So I wouldn't be surprised if that actually did happen. I don't think it was probably thousands of pastors, probably just a few dozen really popular ones that were summoned. Well, it's going to be interesting to find out how this goes down. Oh, here's a similar question. I saw a post on X saying pastors were being talked to about upcoming UFO disclosure. Were you notified? Well, nope, I'm not notified. Hopefully, I'm not on their radar. I'm certainly not on their radar because I'm influential in the way that they want pastors to be influential. Hopefully, I'm not on their radar for being influential in a way that they don't want to know about. Okay, here's a good question. Can you speak on the last day that post-trib believers use to refute the pre-trib rapture? So yeah, the scriptures talk about there's a resurrection on the last day. And so if you start with the assumption that, okay, there's one resurrection, that means there's only one last day. And on that last day, everyone that's going to be raised goes up. Well, if this is the case, you start with those assumptions, then the pre-trib rapture is not true. And everyone that's going to be raised gets raised at the second coming. And this is the position of amillennialism, the position of post-tribulationism, even when it's premillennial. Here's the problem. Let's start with the doctrine of the Trinity. The Bible says there's one God. Can you show me a verse where it says there's two gods or three gods? No, everywhere the Bible talks about God, there's one God. Just one God, one Elohim, one Jehovah. And yet we have evidence in the Bible that has brought us to believe that there's a Trinity. Jehovah the Father, Jehovah the Son, Jehovah the Holy Spirit. The Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. I don't see how we can escape it. Even the doctrine that God is love requires the Trinity. God didn't become love after he created mankind. God is eternally, in his innate nature and character, he's love. Now, he's not a narcissist. So he wasn't looking in the mirror for all of eternity saying, I love you. You're so beautiful. You're so amazing. I love you. No, there was a Father. There was a Son. There was a Holy Spirit. There was love going back and forth between all three persons of the Trinity. God is love. Love, in my mind, is one of the strongest arguments for the Trinity. Now, once we understand how this works, we say there's one God. That does not exclude three manifestations of the triune God. The same way, there's one resurrection. That does not forbid three different aspects of one resurrection. We know from the scriptures that Jesus was already raised from the dead nearly 2,000 years ago. So we've already got a resurrection where not everybody gets raised on the same day. So why would we have a problem if this resurrection has two aspects yet? One where the body of Christ is resurrected prior to the tribulation, and one where the Jewish remnant and the non-church Gentiles are raised from the dead at the second coming. The fact of the matter is, the Bible makes a very, very strong argument for a pre-tribulation rapture. And it basically forces us to embrace a three-stage resurrection. Jesus Christ, who's the head of the church, then the body of the church. And so now we've got the regent with his co-regents, and then the resurrection of the people that get ruled over in the kingdom. If you reject this two-stage resurrection at the end, you end up being on the same ground as post-tribulationism. You have only glorified believers to rule, and you don't have any believers to enter the kingdom and be ruled over. You don't have a kingdom. And also John 5:28 and 29, there will come an hour, this seems to imply a single time, when all will come out of their graves. Well, there's a lot of passages that talk about the second coming in a generic sense. And there's a lot of passages that talk about the resurrection in a generic sense. So here in John chapter 5, we have, and I think there's a passage in John 6 that goes along with it. You have the resurrection of the just and the resurrection of the unjust. But just because they're mentioned in the same breath under the heading of the resurrection doesn't mean they happen at the same time. If we trust the other plain statements of Scripture, we see that there's 1,000 years between the resurrection of the just and the resurrection of the unjust. And there's a principle here for the interpretation of Scripture. You can't let a generic statement overthrow a particular statement. You just can't do that. Okay, so we already answered all the questions for tonight. That's pretty amazing. All right, let's go on to the other unanswered questions. Do I have any unanswered questions? Okay, Matthew 6:13 states, lead us not into temptation and deliver us from the evil one. Can that tie into Revelation 3:10? Well, I think there's going to be some overlap here. But the principle that's stated in Matthew 6:13 about lead us not into temptation, deliver us from the evil one, I think that's a general principle that applies both to the church and to Israel. That principle will be honored when the Lord Jesus delivers his church from the time of great tribulation, from the tribulation, but it'll also be true when the Lord delivers his people during the tribulation, through the tribulation. He's still going to keep them from the evil one. There's nothing as far as Satan's dealings with the church that would forbid the church from being battered and persecuted and hounded by the Antichrist or by Satan, but there's everything that forbids the evil one from doing us permanent spiritual damage, like robbing our salvation. Okay, we got Luke 17:34, and there's a question on could this verse give us insight is when Jesus mentions night in this verse. So let's look at Luke 17:34. He says, I tell you, in that night there will be two men in bed, the one will be taken and the other will be left. So it's very interesting here. In this particular passage in Luke, see, we have the one taken and the one left, and we got one handling of it in Matthew 24, and we got another handling of it in Luke 17. So people, they come to one taken, the other left, and a lot of people go down the path of saying all these one taken, other left passages, they all can only be rapture. They're only rapture. And someone else says, nope, they're all only the second coming. There's no reference to the rapture. Personally, I think they're both wrong. I think one taken, the other left is simply the separation principle. It applies at the rapture. There's a separation there, a 50-50 separation of professing believers. There's a 50-50 separation of professing believers at the second coming. And a 50-50 separation of the Jews. Half are saved and half are lost. So when we come to Luke 17 here, I think if this is talking about the second coming, which I think it is, this one here, and it's the ones that are taken here are not taken to heaven. That already happened in Matthew 24. These ones here, they're taken, and where are they taken? They're taken to Armageddon. It's the same separation principle in a different circumstance, different event. And they're taken in the morning. Zechariah 14 is very, very clear that it's very early in the morning. Zechariah 14, Jerusalem's taken. They're captured. And half of Jerusalem is led away captive. I think that's what this is talking about. Okay, do either of the gentlemen have any opinion as to if a Sasquatch or Bigfoot type creature actually exists? I absolutely believe in Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I believe in it for I got several reasons that have combined together for my belief in this. One of them is that there's just centuries of Native American tales about the hairy ape man. Another one is the scientific evidence, the footprints with primate footprints, the hair samples, unknown primate hair samples, the unknown primate feces samples. There's just the recordings of primate voices and calls, numerous sightings, and the sightings are usually so fast, just like 2-3 seconds. You don't have time to get your camera up and take a picture. But I absolutely believe in them, and I've even had my own Bigfoot or Sasquatch experience. I do have a video on that if you want to hear the whole story. I'll just give you the nutshell version here. When I was the summer after my sophomore year in high school, I went on a backpacking trip with my dad and my brothers and my sister Mindy. We were hiking in I think it was the Tobacco Root Mountains in Montana. The fishing was terrible, so my brother and I went for a hike, and we got just a few hundred yards out of camp, and I cut tracks. At first, I thought they were grizzly bear tracks, but as I followed them in the mud, I realized these tracks are not round. They're footprint shaped, human footprint shaped. There's 5 toes on there. There's no claw marks. And these strides were 5 to 6 feet apart. It was not quadruped tracks that are a few feet apart. They were bipedal tracks, 5 to 6 feet apart. I followed these tracks, sometimes in easy to follow mud, sometimes in dried mud, sometimes in bogs and swamp and grass. And in forest stuff, I was able to follow these tracks all the way up to part way up the mountain until we come to complete rock slide, and I lost the tracks. We followed them for well over a mile. I'm going to guess we may have followed them for maybe a mile and a quarter, mile and a half. It was quite a long ways. Very fascinating. Not a doubt in my mind I was trailing a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. Okay, how can you talk pre-tribulation rapture believers into believing that the restrainer is what is holding the Antichrist back? They think the Antichrist is here first to be revealed and then the rapture. Very, very interesting observation you make here. I've thought of the same thing myself, where I've thought that it's inconsistent for a pre-tribulationist to, I'm kind of wondering here, folks, maybe somebody can help me out. Why does, like, every question for the last 10 questions, we get a laughing face? Does someone actually think all of these questions are funny, or is someone just kind of trolling us? I'd like to know. If you got an answer, let me know. You can drop it in the chat, give me a shout out, something. But anyway, I think it is inconsistent. If we're going to embrace the conception that it's the work of God restraining the Antichrist. In fact, it's the work of the Holy Spirit in the church that's restraining the Antichrist, and the restrainer is not released until the church is removed. If you hold that position, then it's inconsistent when some of the same people on a different page in a different book say that the church is actually going to see the Antichrist revealed. It doesn't make sense to me. Now, thankfully, this is a minority position in pre-tribulation rapturism. You can't use this argument against the pre-trib rapture people for being inconsistent, because you can't take something that only a few pre-tribbers believe and apply it to all the pre-trib camp and just say all the pre-tribbers are all a bunch of hokies and they're all inconsistent. You just can't do that. The fact of the matter is how I handle the restraining work of God. I don't think the church is a restrainer. I don't think the Holy Spirit in the church is a restrainer. I think it's an exegetical mistake. I think it doesn't really quite do justice to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 in the later verses. And it doesn't really make good sense. I don't think that the Holy Spirit alone is a restrainer. I don't think the Holy Spirit in the church, which is smaller than the Holy Spirit, is the restrainer. I don't think the church is a restrainer. Now, I do believe that the Holy Spirit and the church are part of God's restraining work, but they're a small part of it. The restraining work is done. It's released. It's finished at the first seal. I want you to think about this. When we come to chapters 4 and 5, we got the glorified, resurrected churches in heaven represented by the 24 elders who were the heads of the 24 courses, the royal priesthood. While we're there, the Father hands the Son the title deed to the earth, that's the scroll, and he peels the first seal back. And what happens when he peels the first seal back? The Antichrist is released. This tells us that that's the moment in time when the mystery of iniquity is released. It's no longer restrained. So the Lord first takes the church to heaven, and then while we're there in the courts of heaven, we get to see the Lord release his work of restraint. Where he looses that first seal. That's his first governmental work. So anyway, I think that that's a much better way to handle the subject. So the God ceasing his restraining work and the rapture of the church are definitely closely related. They definitely happen in the same time period, but I don't think they're the same event. I think that's where people have gone and made a mistake. And then as far as 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 goes, let me just take and quickly deal with that. A lot of people make a mistake here. Verse 3 says, "Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. And the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition." And some people will take this verse 3 and they'll say, see, that day is not going to come. That is the day of the rapture until the falling away comes first and the man of sin is revealed. But this is not what it says. First of all, that day here is not the day of the rapture. That's an assumption. It doesn't follow the grammar. If you look at the grammar in this passage, verse 1 has the concerning the coming of our Lord and his gathering together unto him. That's the rapture. And then it's contrasted with verse 2 and verse 3. We have the day of the Lord. And I know there's a textual difference here, but I think that you can make an argument based on doctrine and on the flow of the context that the day of the Lord is a better reading than the day of Christ. Because we're talking here of the coming of judgment. The day of Christ is not the coming of judgment. The day of Christ is not the Antichrist, folks. The day of the Lord is the Antichrist. The day of the Lord is the tribulation. So I vastly prefer the reading, the day of the Lord. So when we come to verse 3, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day, that the day of the Lord is not here. The Greek verb is enestikon. It's the perfect of enistemi. Enestikon in the perfect, whether is a whole verb or it means is present, is a participle, means is present. That's just how it's translated. It's how it's used, not just in the Bible, but in Koine Greek. Anyone can look this up. Anyone can verify this. I'm not blowing smoke here, folks. This is a half hour worth of research on your part, if you care to actually research and get real facts. So this, if you think about it now, let no one deceive you. That day is not here unless the falling away happens first and the man of sin is revealed. So what he's saying is, look around. Do you see the apostasy and the Antichrist who brings the apostasy? No. Well, if you don't see them, you're not in the day of the Lord. If you do see them, you were in the day of the Lord. So These things do not happen before the day of the Lord. These things are the evidence that happens within the day of the Lord that proves that you are in the day of the Lord. Anyway, if you want more information on that, I have videos on 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 3 that walk you through the translation of this verse. I cover the fact that this is a petition. I go through the parts of the petition. I point out the translation of Extinction, and I point out the use of the word first and how it fits the grammar. I'll walk you through the whole thing. You got questions? I will answer your questions in that video. Okay, question 15. Many rabbis believe that we are in Ezekiel 38 due to October 7th is the beginning of the war and we are already living peacefully in unwalled villages. Wouldn't they know best living in Israel? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And this is really, folks, to be honest, I think this is a brain dead observation. And I really don't understand why anyone would even consider it. How can you, living in Israel today, think that you're living in peace and security in an unwalled village? I mean, a theological person with a theological prejudice can believe that, but the average man on the street that's in Israel does not feel like they're dwelling in peace and security. The rockets come, they're at war on 3 fronts. They're at war with Hezbollah north of them. They're at war with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. They got problems in the West Bank for like a half a front, and they got problems with Iran. So how in the world would anyone think that they're dwelling in peace? Dwelling peacefully. It doesn't fit. Now, also, when we come to Ezekiel 38, it's really a stretch to think that October 7th is the fulfillment of the Gog and Magog war. It doesn't even begin to fit. October 7th was primarily Hamas with a handful of people associated with some other extremist fundamentalist jihadists. But Russia was not there. Gomer was not there. Turkey was not there. I mean, Iran was only there in proxy, not in person. So it doesn't fit. What we need to do, folks, I just want to encourage you here, if you haven't already heard me say this a million times, you get to hear it for the first time. And if you heard me say it a million times, you get to hear it for the 100. You get to hear it one more time. Take the scriptures literally at face value with childlike faith. It gives us the nations that are in Ezekiel 38 and 39. If you don't see those nations, whether you're watching it from down here on earth or whether you're watching it from the balcony in heaven with a cup of Heaven Bucks coffee in your hand, it doesn't matter. Either way, if you don't see those nations, you don't see Ezekiel 38 and 39. If you don't see Israel first dwelling in peace, you don't see this. We need to see this current problems in Israel resolved, and Israel go into a time of faux shallow peace where she's going to relax, and then she's going to have that Gog and Magog juggernaut come on her. And so as far as this goes, folks, I want you to stop listening to fast-talking rabbis. If those rabbis are not dispensational enough, that they are dispensational, premillennial, rabbinical Jews who believe in a Messiah, then don't listen to them, except maybe for a little technical point here or two that you can get some help on. The big picture, they're wrong. They don't understand prophecy. They can't understand prophecy. And I just see so many people who profess to be Jewish rabbis who are sowing error in the church. Some of the worst problems we have in the dispensational camp are coming from the Hebrew roots groups and coming from people who got hyper spiritual, hyper figurative interpretations of prophecy. I'm not going to mention some of the names, but if I mentioned them, you would know exactly who I'm talking about. Was the transfiguration ever prophesied? Only indirectly. When the Lord said, There'll be some of you standing here who shall not taste death until you see the Son of Man coming in glory. He was talking about the Mount of Transfiguration when they got a foretaste of the second coming. There's many people that have normalcy bias, or they've unplugged from the internet. How are we to share the love of Christ with folks that have no clue what they believe? Well, the first thing is just to get them reading the Bible. Just get them, just talk to them in generic terms about the fact of eternal damnation, eternal salvation, the fact that there is a God in heaven, the fact there's a creator in heaven, the fact there's a redeemer in heaven, the fact that Jesus Christ is a truly historical being who came to the world and lived and died and raised again for mankind. And just get them interested in the generic concepts and get them to start reading the New Testament. If they will start reading the New Testament, that battle is on the right direction. It's on the right front. Do you think the rapture will take place during the confusion of Ezekiel 38? No, I think the rapture is going to take place during the faux peace in Ezekiel 38 or before that faux peace. It can't take, I don't think it's going to take place afterwards, because after that or during that conflict, that's God honoring Israel as his people. So we got to be out of here before then. Now, if we got a short window between the rapture and Gog and Magog, then we'll probably go up in the time of faux peace for Israel. And that time of faux peace will be peace and security for us down here. It'll be the relative normality of Matthew chapter 24. But if it's a bigger window, we could be going up before that time of faux peace comes. And I'm not going to have a complaint either way. I'm ready to go. I'm looking forwards to drinking Heaven Bucks coffee every day. Okay, I've heard that the water canopy was destroyed during the flood, but lately I've heard some say the water canopy is still intact. What's the truth? Well, they're both true. There was a much larger water canopy prior to the flood. We still have the remnants of that water canopy today. That's why we have water in the atmosphere. That's why we have clouds and rain. Do you think J.D. Vance will turn his back on Israel? Isn't he tied closely to Tucker Carlson? I don't know that I could say for sure that he's going to. We don't know the future, and I don't read tarot cards, and I'm not a prophet. However, just judging by discernment, I think the odds are very good that he and thousands of other influential politicians in America are going to go in the anti-Israel direction. Basically, ultimately, where this is going, everybody that isn't born again is going to turn against Israel. I want you to weigh this thought very clearly, because we're not too far away from the sheep and goats judgment in Matthew chapter 25. When you get to the sheep and goats judgment in Matthew 25, what do we see? We see, folks, God dividing the Gentile nations into unbelievers, or the Gentiles into unbelievers and believers, not on the basis of the new birth, though we could have, not on the basis of faith, though we could have, not on the basis of the mark of the beast, though we could have. He divides them on the basis of their response to Israel. I want you to think about that. On the one camp, there were people who, despite the cost, because of their faith in the God of the Bible and honoring his word, they honored Israel and they helped Israel. On the other side, you have people, some of them probably were actually intrinsically heart haters of Israel, and some of them were probably just too afraid to do what's right, too afraid to actually believe the truth. And so they cowered in front of the devil, and they sided with the Antichrist in his anti-Israel, anti-Zion, anti-Jewish message. Folks, when you get to the end of the tribulation and you can draw a big circle, and that circle's all the unbelievers, that's the exact same circle as everyone who takes the mark of the beast. It's the exact same circle of those who are not born again. It's the exact same circle of those who are anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, anti-Jews. The whole world's going there. We're on that path right now. This is a raging forest fire. In the next few years, the whole evangelical church and the whole conservative political movement are going to be absolutely decimated by this. And when the rapture happens, the whole bottom will fall out of this thing. Virtually every last Israel defender on earth is going to be gone when the rapture happens. And the ones that are left are going to be so weak and so intimidated, they will not be able to withstand the lies and the spiritual warfare unless they get born again. The Daniel 7 beasts aren't necessarily the same as the metals of Daniel 2. Why is that assumed by some? Well, I think it's absolutely certain that they're the same. And I don't think anyone that I know that's ever taught that has just merely assumed that. I think it's pretty clear that you've got the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans with the golden image. And it's also clear from other passages of scripture that explain what's going on in Daniel 7 that we have the same four empires. They describe the same things. The description of the beasts is similar to the Babylonian Empire, and you have the Medo-Persian Empire, you have the Greek Empire, and you have the Roman Empire. I think they're the same. Okay, do you believe we will know moments before we are taken up? I absolutely do. I believe that based on 2 Peter. Let me pull that verse up. I believe it's 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 19. So we have the prophetic word confirmed, which you do well to take heed, as a light that shines in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your heart. So at the same time that the day is literally dawning on God's prophetic calendar, the morning star is going to rise in our heart. Folks, the morning star is Jesus, right? It's not merely Jesus coming in the clouds. It's Jesus indwelling us through the Holy Spirit. And so when Jesus, this coming, is excited about coming to gather us, I think he's going to give us a heads up. Today's the day. This hour's the hour. I can hardly wait for that day. Okay. Does the guest believe in the blood moon theories? If so, why? I'm not positive of the guest from when this question was answered, if he actually believes in the blood moon theories or not. I can tell you that I don't. I've read several articles and watched several videos walking through all this, and books and stuff, walking through the blood moon stuff. And here, I got a couple problems with the blood moon theories. One is the actual blood moon in the Bible is not something that happens on a regular basis. It's not just a normal phenomenon that happens on a regular basis. The blood moon in Bible prophecy is an event that happens at the second coming. It's a one-off event. It's absolutely terrifying. So that it's associated with the sun turning black. It's associated with the heavens rolling, which is also described as the stars falling. And it's described as the heavens moving like a scroll. It's associated with the planets being shaken out of their orbits so that they're not following their normal orbital patterns. It's associated with a great shaking here on Earth. It's associated with volcanoes on Earth going off. So if you don't see these other things, what you're looking at is not the biblical blood moons. And then where in the world do you get the justification for this blood moon stuff? Now, people will fall back on Genesis 1:14, and they'll talk about the lights in the firmament of the heavens, which are given to divide the day from the night, and for signs and seasons and days and years. And yeah, the blood moon is one of those things. But I want you to notice here that this is the creation mandate here that we have in Genesis 1:14. There's no implication here of signs in the sense of judgment. This is signs to measure the passing of days, weeks, years, months, holidays, whatever. This purpose here in Genesis 1:14 is going to continue for all of eternity, millions and billions and trillions of years. And for all those millions, billions, and trillions of years, there's not going to be signs of judgment. This is the creation purpose. Now, another thing I have a problem with the blood moons. I see people make their lists about associating the blood moons with this event and that event and this event and that event. And I start looking at their data and they're sloppy. You know, here's one event that happens 2 days from a blood moon. And here's one event that happens 1 day from a blood moon. But they got a half a dozen events that happen a week from a blood moon and a bunch that are 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, 20 days from a blood moon. You can't do that. That's sloppiness. If God is going to be using blood moons, the traditional common blood moon, for a sign, they're going to happen on the exact same day as the event. If they're not, then how do you say it's a sign? You could randomly go through history and take any event you want. Anytime there's an earthquake on Earth, that's a prophetic sign. Any earthquake 5.0 or higher. And you could start lining it up with events all over the world that have happened in the last 500 years. And you're going to find that every time there's an earthquake 5.0 or bigger, you're going to find that you can line it up. If you're going to be willing to be 2-3 weeks off, you're going to line them up with all kinds of wars and significant events and economic crashes. And you're going to say, wow, earthquakes are a prophetic sign. But you can only do that if you're willing to be sloppy and hyper spiritual. And I'm not willing to be sloppy, and I'm not willing to be hyper spiritual. Okay. I think Mystery Babylon is the internet, a virtual city, all nations drinking over fornication and money and drugs and porn, and she'll be destroyed in an hour. Well, there's no doubt in my mind that the internet is a vast, vast manifestation of Mystery Babylon, but it's certainly not Mystery Babylon in and of itself. There's 3 Babylons in the book of Revelation. There is the city of in Revelation 17, we have religious Babylon. But that religious Babylon is destroyed by political Babylon. You got the woman that rides the beast. The woman that rides the beast is religious Babylon. The beast that's being ridden is political Babylon. And then in Revelation 18, you have economic Babylon. 3 different Babylons. Not only did the Roman Empire split in the east half and the west half, it split into religious Rome, economic Rome, political Rome, and you could say economic Babylon, political Babylon, and religious and economic. So it's all the same. Last days Rome is last days the Roman Empire. The last days Roman Empire is last days Babylon. So there's 3 of them. Religious Babylon is going to get destroyed in the middle of the 70th week. Political and economic Babylon will get destroyed at the end of the 70th week. And when they get destroyed, the internet will get destroyed with them. Now, the internet is probably going to be one of the greatest tools of the enemy, but I don't think it is the enemy. We're going to have internet in eternity, folks, and it'll be glorious. There won't be any garbage. There won't be any scumbags. There won't be any liars, deceivers, or cheats. People are not going to cut corners when they make software. You're not going to have software producers making garbage that doesn't work right. It's going to be amazing, and we're going to enjoy it. How do we watch the political, economic, religious pattern without getting stuck labeling people? You can't. And don't believe this nonsense that it's wrong to label people. I don't take that nonsense. Labels are not exhaustive. Labels are not perfect, but labels are useful tools. It's helpful to know if someone's non-dispensational or dispensational. It's helpful to know if they're amillennial, post-millennial, premillennial, or don't care millennial. They're no millennial. It's helpful to know if someone is a Schofield dispensationalist or a hardcore J.N. Darby, William Kelly dispensationalist, or if they're a hyper dispensationalist of the Cornelius R. Stam type. These are useful, but labels are they're relative useful. You got to be careful when you use them. They're helpful, but they're not perfect. And you can't avoid using them. There's liberals, there's conservatives, there's moderates, there's independents. The fact of the matter is, if you don't use labels, you can't do your job right. If you're a carpenter and you say, and you don't use labels, how are you going to tell someone, go get me a hammer to pound nails? You say, he sees you trying to pound a nail with the rock and he runs your toolbox, and you don't label tools, so he just grabs anything and brings it. If you use labels, you can say, I want a screwdriver, I want a hammer, I want a crescent wrench, I want a monkey wrench, I want a coffee. We use labels, and it's stupid not to use them. It'd be stupid for a pharmacist not to use labels. He could go to jail. It's stupid for a doctor not to use labels. He'd sue for malpractice if he doesn't. And yet we got this stupid idea that Christians shouldn't use labels. That idea comes from the devil. I want you to understand that. If you believe that you should never use labels, you need to go to Walmart and buy a new brain. Seriously. Or at least go to God and get a new brain. You need to do something. Labels are extremely useful. You just don't want to judge people harshly by labels. Just use them for a tool. They're starting places. Whether you believe in the Trinity or you don't believe in the Trinity, whether you're Arminian or Calvinist, these are all useful. Not perfect, but useful. So now that I've got on my soapbox and preached for a few minutes, we'll go back to the questions. Okay, I heard this today, so I'd like your thoughts. America is represented by the eagle. Revelation 12:14, the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness. I don't correlate these two. Revelation 12:14, I don't believe America is going to deliver Israel in the tribulation. By this point in time, all the nations on earth are opposed to Israel. Everyone is against Israel. And America is included. So America is not going to deliver Israel. To get the understanding of the great wings of the eagle, you got to go back to the Old Testament prophets and look at passages where we read about the great wings of an eagle, and it will take you to a figurative picture of God's deliverance of Israel. God is going to deliver them in a miraculous way, as if they were actually borne up on the wings of a great eagle. Now, I do think that the picture of America being represented by eagle does have prophetic significance, but not in this context. I think it's just one more indication that America has something to do with the Roman Empire in the last days. And I'll just leave it at that. And we'll cover America and Rome and the empire some more fully in another day. Okay, I read in Malachi 4 today that Elijah is coming before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Do you think we will see him before the rapture? And I know I do not. We need to make a distinction. When the Bible talks about the coming of the day of the Lord, or the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord, it's not talking about the start of the tribulation time. It's talking about the arrival of the fullness of the day. So the rapture is the morning star of the day of the Lord. That's the first sign the world's going to get that the day of the Lord is dawning on this world. Shortly thereafter, the dawning starts, and the dawning of the day of the Lord is going to be the increasing judgments of the time of tribulation. And then the second coming is marked by the sunrise of the day of the Lord. That's the day that's called the arrival of the day of the Lord, or the coming of the great day of the Lord. in some passages, just strictly call it the day of the Lord. So once you understand the day of the Lord has a dawning and a tribulation and the arrival of the day proper, and then the day proper is the millennium, it helps you to understand Bible prophecy much better. So on the basis of this understanding, Elijah comes before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He's going to come before the second coming. I think Elijah and Moses are going to be working in the second half of the tribulation. So I think that the same time that the Antichrist and the false prophet are working their powerful display of satanic miracles, they're going to be opposed at the exact same time by God's two witnesses, Moses and Elijah, who will be working supernatural heavenly miracles. So this will be the greatest display of supernatural fireworks in the history of the world. I think just like Moses passed the baton to Joshua right at the border of the promised land, so Moses is going to pass the baton to Jesus right at the edge of the second coming and the arrival of the kingdom. And just like Elijah is going to pass the baton spiritually through John the Baptist to Jesus through his ministry at the first coming, and so the true Elijah is going to pass the baton to Jesus at the second coming. I think Moses and Elijah are going to be raised from the dead just hours before the second coming. Okay, well, here's a good request. Will either of you guys please start doing response videos to some of these covenant theology guys who are leading people astray about Israel? We probably need to get on that. I am going to have Brandon Holthouse on with me this coming Thursday night, so that this week our video will be on Thursday night instead of Friday, because that's when I can get Brandon on live. And we're going to cover some of Israel and the replacement theory stuff. But I will try and do some on my own. Okay, question number 30. Is there a difference between the abyss and hell? Yes. You can talk about hell generally, and then hell and the abyss are just two different spots. Particular hell and particular abyss are two different spots in hell general. I'm not opposed to that kind of terminology. But if we're going to get more technical about it, Hades or hell from the New Testament and Sheol in the Old Testament, that's the residing place of, well, right now it's only the ungodly dead, but for a while, hell itself was divided into two places. The one side had the godly dead and the other side had the ungodly dead. We called the side of the godly Abraham's bosom. That was emptied when the Lord Jesus Christ raised from the dead, took captivity captive, and now from that moment on, it's absent from the body and present with the Lord. So, but we still have the ungodly dead are in Sheol, but there's also a place called the abyss, the abusos in the Greek, and it's called the pit in some places in the Old Testament. This is where the ungodly fallen angels, the demons, the dead Nephilim that are not allowed to wander here on earth, this is where they are. And at the second coming, when the Lord binds all the ungodly here on earth, he's going to bind the fallen angels, all the demons, all the living Nephilim. He's going to cast them all into the abyss. But he's going to cast the Antichrist and the false prophet directly in the lake of fire. They don't get a second chance. Those two Nephilim are going to go directly to the lake of fire. What's spiritual fornication? Spiritual fornication is when you do on the spiritual realm, you're engaging with things you shouldn't engage. You're engaging, and it's as wicked and evil as physical fornication. And so when we run after sin and iniquity, we're a believer, we're committing fornication. That's spiritual fornication. Matthew 27 says tombs were opened when Jesus was resurrected. Where did they return to afterwards? Well, I don't know if they walked around for just a few minutes, a few hours, a couple days, but I think that the Lord just eventually took them and they went straight to heaven, alive in their physical bodies. They're up in heaven right now, the same status that Elijah had and Enoch had when they went to heaven alive in a physical body. So Enoch and Elijah went to heaven alive in a physical body, and they'd never died before. These men raised from the dead went to heaven in a physical body, and they've already died once, but they'll never die again. And all of them get to partake in the resurrection. Okay, so the people who aren't eagerly looking for will still go up in the rapture, right? Absolutely. And it would be awful if they were left behind. Thankfully, the Lord, when he saves people, he saves them merely on the basis of faith. In their sanctification after that point and the renewing of their mind after that point, this is all part of progressive sanctification, and none of us are perfect. So when it comes time to the rapture, people are raptured on the basis of the same grace they're saved by. The only thing necessary to go up in the rapture is that you're born again. And so the person who is the most carnal, backslidden believer on planet Earth is going to go up in the rapture just as fast as the person who's the most wholly devoted believer on planet Earth. This is the grace of God. And, here's another point about this. The Lord is more concerned that our heart is screwed on straight than that our head is screwed on straight. So we're going to lose a reward for having bad doctrine about the rapture, but we're not going to miss out on the blessing of the resurrection or the simple fact of eternal reward for being a believer. And by the way, some people are so worried that when they stand at the judgment seat of Christ, they're not going to get any eternal reward. I think this is a mistake. It's a misunderstanding of how the judgment seat of Christ works. You're not going to get, if you don't have anything to get rewarded for at the judgment seat of Christ, you're not going to get a reward for what you did. But you're still going to get a reward for what you are. Everyone's going to get an infinite inheritance as a child of God if they're born again. And that's what we call the passive reward. Everyone gets an infinite passive reward simply for being born again. If you can't get excited about that, folks, you got a mental problem. This should get us hyped up. This should really help us to see how glorious and gracious God is. But now when we come, let's double back now and talk about the judgment seat of Christ. I think there's a lot of people that are afraid they're not going to get anything there, but they're thinking with a harsh attitude against themselves, judging by a legalistic standard. There is no legalism at the judgment seat of Christ. We're not judged on the basis and ground of works. Our works are judged on the basis of grace. Very, very big difference here. And we're going to be rewarded at the judgment seat of Christ by the same magnanimous grace that saved us in the first place. In fact, the Bible says that no one who so much as gave a cup of cold water to someone in the name of a prophet is going to lose the reward. So folks, if the only thing you ever did is give someone a glass of water or the equivalent thereof because they dropped the name of John MacArthur, or they dropped the name of Darby, or they dropped the name of Billy Sunday or someone you appreciate, if that's all you've ever done, just one thing, you are going to get a reward at the judgment seat of Christ. So be encouraged. In Revelation, the rapture happens at the sound of the last trumpet. Please explain. Well, I can explain why the rapture happens at the seventh trumpet in the book of Revelation, because it doesn't happen at the last trumpet or the seventh trumpet in the book of Revelation. The rapture happens at the last trumpet that ends the church age. it does not happen at the last trumpet that ends the 70th week, which is the finishing of the Jewish age. There's two very different things. The Lord Jesus comes for the church at the rapture, goes back to heaven. It's just the first stage of his glorious second coming. And then he comes again in the full sense at the second coming. So he comes for the saints. He comes with the saints. There's a trumpet for the rapture. There's a trumpet for the resurrection of the Old Testament saints. And when you come to the book of Revelation, if you're going to try and put the rapture at the seventh trumpet, the big problem you're going to have, if you once understand that the seals, trumpets, and bowls are not end to end with no overlap, but that the seals all go all the way to the second coming. Once they're open, they run all the way. And the seals overlap on top of each other, and they overlap. And then you come to the seventh seal, it introduces the trumpets. The trumpets are on top of those seals. The trumpets end at the second coming. And then the thunders are introduced, and they go end to end all the way to the second coming. And then the bowls are introduced, and they're poured out in order all the way to the end. So these things go that way. This has the seventh trumpet is the arrival of the kingdom at the second coming. If you're going to associate the rapture with the seventh trumpet, you're putting the rapture at the second coming. You're not putting it during the 70th week. You can't have some kind of a mid-trib rapture. You can't have some kind of a pre-wrath rapture. The seventh trumpet is the arrival of the kingdom. It plainly says so. And there's plenty of information in the scriptures that we should have the sixth, every one of the seals should end at the second coming. And every series of judgments ends at the second coming. So the seventh trumpet is the second coming. I have a video on that. It's called The Order of Revelation, if you're interested. It's one of my most requested conference messages. Does Lee have an opinion on if there are devils and demons and Nephilim now bound in hell or the abyss, or are they all free? Well, we know there are fallen angels in the abyss right now. We know that. They're already bound. There may well be some demons or Nephilim down there already too. I don't know of any scripture that says that for certain. I know there's a lot of devils and demons right now that are free. And Nephilim that are on earth right now. And for that matter, I think the Nephilim are the living versions of it that haven't died, and the demons, or the devils, sometimes people call them, the demons, are the spirits of the dead Nephilim. So every time a Nephilim dies, his spirit still hangs around as a fallen spirit. But most, if not all of them, are free right now. They will be bound in the 1,000 years. Okay, how much off could the biblical calendar be compared to our calendar? How much longer could it be if our calendar is wrong? Well, the question here probably shouldn't be the calendar question so much as it should be the chronology question. Because you have the Masoretic calendar is associated with the Masoretic chronology, or how long they think we've been here on earth. The Essene calendar is associated with the so-called Essene chronology and where they think we're at. And then we have associated with the Gregorian calendar, there's probably 50 different chronologies done by different people that are chronologists. All of them have some merit. If you want the most accurate calendar, simply for the one that's actually closest to the actual length of the year, beyond all shadow of a doubt, no calendar is closer than the Gregorian calendar. It's only 1/4 of a day off a year. Problem with the Gregorian calendar, you're going to have a difficulty keeping the Jewish feasts according to the lunar cycles. Very, very inconsistent. If you use the Essene calendar, it's very consistent for synthetic lunar cycles. It's insanely consistent. And that's why they made it that way. If you want actual lunar cycles, which is, I think, the Old Testament pattern, you're going to have to use the Masoretic calendar. That calendar is going to drift backwards about 11 1/3 days or so per year. And so 7 times in a 19-year cycle, you have to add an extra month, Adar 2, to the calendar to catch back up, so that you're keeping the solar feasts according more in harmony with the solar year. Thankfully, when we get into the kingdom, where the solar year and the lunar year are going to be reharmonized, the solar system will be recalibrated. We're going to have a 360-day solar year and a 360-day lunar year, and they'll be exact. They won't be 1 second off. Every year, every solar year will be exactly 12 lunar months, and every lunar month will be exactly 30 days. And you can go a million years on that cycle and it won't be off 1 second. We're going into a glorious eternity, folks. Nothing's sloppy, nothing's broken. Everything is super awesome, amazing. Now, let's go back to this question now about how much longer could it be if our calendar is off? Well, as far as calendars go and their connections to chronology, I think all the calendars are off. We know that. The Masoretic calendar, as I think, it's a number of decades too short. It thinks we got a lot more time to go. The Essene calendar is also short. It's got us going out longer than I think we're actually going to go. But our chronologies, we don't know exactly where we are. I mean, even if we assume, and I think it's probably correct, that somewhere from the time of the cross, we're supposed to be measuring 2,000 years because we got the 6,000 years from the garden to the second coming, yet we don't really know for sure where to measure from. And that causes a tremendous amount of problems. Not massive problems. We're still in the ballpark like horseshoes and hand grenades. But if we're supposed to measure from the cross, we don't have a whole lot of time left before we're just completely blow that theory out of the water. Well, then what are you going to measure the 2,000 years from? Well, we fall back on maybe the salvation of the first Gentile. Some of the Samaritans were partly Gentile. So the first Samaritan was saved, 3-4 years after the cross? So now we're measuring the 2,000 years from, let's say, 3037, which will, okay, so that puts us a lot farther out. So now we're out to 2037, and then we back up, and the rapture could be in 2030, 2029. But if we're got to go another couple of years before the first Gentile was saved, that takes it farther out. So we've got this much bigger window to deal with and a lot more sloppiness to deal with. So what I'm saying here is our calendars are wrong, and our application of some of these calendar numbers are wrong. We don't know how far off we are. We know we're not, I don't think we're more than a couple years off in our calendars for our Gregorian calendar, because we don't have to measure all the way from the garden. We only have to measure from the area of the cross. And we have a couple options. We got the cross option. We got the salvation of the first Jews, so that we're going from a Gentile remnant to the church with one new man, which has got Gentiles and Jews together, and measure from that. So we could be here another 4 or 5 years. I hope not. I wouldn't be surprised if we go up in the next couple of years, next 3 years. But I'm also not going to be seriously surprised if we're here a little bit longer than we think and want to be. Catholics believe that non-Catholics cannot be saved. Will this keep them from the rapture? Well, here's the problem. If a Catholic is on such sectarian ground that he believes that only Catholics can be saved and no non-Catholic can be saved, the odds that that person is born again is just about zero. I wouldn't place it at impossible, because someone could have been born again 10 minutes ago, and they're going to need a few weeks or a few months to get rid of their Catholic prejudices by reading the Bible. But just as a matter of probabilities, the odds that someone with that mentality is actually saved is pretty low. Usually by the time someone's a Catholic, believes the gospel and gets saved, they've already had a Baptist or Calvary Chapel or a Pentecostal friend or a evangelical Lutheran preaching to them, give them the gospel, gives them a general outline, sets before them the difference between sola scriptura and church in the Bible, church tradition of the Bible, and they already know what's going through what the equation's going on, and they know they got to make a choice. And so they make a choice, Jesus alone, the Bible alone, grace alone, and they walk away from the Catholic Church. But that said, if a Catholic is born again, folks, if he's born again, he's going up in the rapture. Even when we come to the end of the book of Revelation, the Lord has to say regarding Babylon, come out of her, my people, lest you be partaker of her sins. I mean, we're this deep into the things of God, and people still have to be told to come out of Babylon. That's just the way we are, folks. Until we realize that we as Christians, we're thick-headed, our hearts are harder than we think, we're not as teachable as we think, we're slower to come to the truth than we think. We have to deal honestly with that, or we're going to create problems for ourselves and for those that deal with us. Okay, so we went through a boatload of questions tonight. Old questions, new questions. And it's 11:15, and I thank the Lord that my voice is held out. So we're going to wrap things up here, folks. Great show tonight. I want to thank you all for hanging on all the way to the end. And I think we actually did more Q&A than we did the live stream program itself. But anyway, I want to thank my moderators, and I want to thank a lot of people. I see a lot of names here that I recognize. I've been seeing some of you for a long time, so I thank you for showing up. And folks, just keep looking up. I know it gets discouraging. We're going deeper and deeper into this New World Order garbage. We're going deeper and deeper into Big Brother government. We're going deeper and deeper into AI nonsense. And this world is getting to look so unfamiliar and so ugly and so unwarm and so unwelcome. And I know that we can all just hardly wait to be on the streets of gold in New Jerusalem and to worship the Lord in glory and peace. We can just hardly wait to get out of this sewer of unbelief. But just be patient. Keep your eyes on the prize in the skies. Keep your hand to the plow. Just stay busy in the Word, in prayer, in your Bible studies, in your fellowship. Just keep doing what you need to do. So may the Lord bless you all and keep you all. God bless, and we'll see you all next time.